Welcome to our final session in Humanities 1. This is the contemporary spirit, which would be 1950 to the present. So let me make a little bit of a caveat here. Personally, I believe we have gone way beyond this particular period. That sometime perhaps with 9/11 in 2001, or at least with the whole COVID crisis more recently, that we have gone into some new period. We just don't know what that is yet. So we're going to say, however, that the contemporary spirit has lasted from about 1950 to the present. Contemporary trends in Western civilization are always a reaction to values, goals, and achievements of the previous period. In this case, reaction against modernism. And that has caused a number of shifts in our culture and in the humanities. There has been a profound rethinking of the goals and values of modernism. What was modernism trying to achieve? It was rethinking the industrial materialist stage. It was questioning the progress and the advancement of Western civilization. And now the contemporary spirit is questioning that questioning, or at least extending it, maybe taking it further. There's been a criticism or rejection of the systems and institutions of modernism. The big corporations, big government, even church institutions. There's been a questioning of all of that. And there's been an exploration of new paradigms, new models, new ways of looking at things and doing things. And especially there has been this new feature called postmodernism, meaning after modernism. Postmodernism we'll talk about in the next slide. What is postmodernism? Well, postmodernism rejects the view of reality in which a universal truth exists and is valid for all people. Modernism began to question that idea, but that's been pretty standard in Western civilization up until at least the modern period, but especially now in the contemporary period. People have believed traditionally that there's a truth out there. There's a reality out there. Our job is simply to understand what that truth is, to understand reality as it really exists. So the problem is not that reality doesn't exist. The problem is our perception of it. And that's always been the Western viewpoint, that you just got to find what true reality is. You got to find what the truth is, whether it's religious truth or whether it's political truth or whether it's some other, social values, morals. There's a truth out there. There's a reality out there. You just got to find what it is and get busy with it. There have always been those critics of that. Notably, I think back to when Jesus was appearing before Pontius Pilate and Jesus talked about truth, and Pontius Pilate made the sort of the sarcastic remark, "What is truth?" Meaning, is there even a truth? So there have been critics all along, but the basic trend of Western civilization has been that there has been a truth. You just got to figure out what it is. Postmodernism basically rejects that idea. There is no universal truth. Truth is all perception. It's your truth. It's my truth. It's how I perceive. It's how I think. It's how I prefer. There's no standard truth out there for everybody. That's postmodernism. And of course, if you have any sense about what's happening in our culture today, you'll know that postmodernism is almost the norm, that so many people don't believe there is a truth, that it's all whatever you decide it. Therefore, postmodernism is open to a variety of perspectives on truth and reality, your truth, my truth, that sort of thing. And of course, that's always been the case. If 5 people witness a traffic accident and the police arrive and they interview all people that saw it, you're going to get 5 different perspectives on it. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be telling the same story. They'll just be telling 5 different perspectives on the same story. So I think most of Western civilization has always realized that there are perspectives on the truth, but postmodernism goes a step further and says it's all perspective. There is no such thing as truth. So there's a focus on individual perception of truth. However, there is a paradox to postmodernism, and that is, because it's skeptical of general principles, it doesn't believe there's any universal truth. There's no one truth that's true for everybody. It also has to face the logic that even its own principle that there is no universal truth, that may not be true for everybody. That also may not be objectively true. So by stating something categorically, there's no universal truth, They negate their own premise. Postmodernism reacts against key paradigms of the modern era. A paradigm is a model or a way of looking at something, a way of doing something that is commonly accepted. So postmodernism rejects objectivity. The idea that, again, there's data out there. There's hard facts and information. And you just have to find out what those hard facts are and then deal with them. They reject that. They reject the systematic analysis of data to give explanations in cohesive systems. In other words, if you believe that there's objective data, and once you figure out what that data is, then you've got to analyze it and make some sort of system or understanding of it that makes sense, some explanation of it. So they reject that as well. And then they reject the free debate over the legitimacy of the data. And I think we can see that in our society today. Just take the whole COVID thing. You know, there are people say, well, we go with the science. Well, the science has been back and forth on that subject, in some ways at least, you'll have to admit. And the idea is that you can't debate it, that there's no debate over that or some of the other sensitive issues of our day. There cannot be any debate. You cannot question the authorities. You cannot question the standard story of things. I mean, in a previous time, you could question things. They would just think you're a kook and kind of scratch their head and walk away. Now, you're a horrible person if you even want to debate even the interpretation of the data. So that's a whole postmodern thing, is that you don't get to debate things. You don't get to debate the data. Postmodernism reacts against other kinds of paradigms. For example, organization and institution building. Used to be that you had people who were loyal to, for example, the automotive company that they preferred, you know, the Ford people, the Chevy people, the General Motors people, and so on. Or they were loyal to their church. You know, they were raised Catholic, so I'm going to be Catholic. I was raised Baptist. I'm going to be Baptist. I was raised outside the church, so I have nothing to do with any of that. You sort of were loyal to your family's affiliation, or you were loyal to an organization. So that loyalty has been shattered in postmodernism, and everything is fluid. You can be loyal to one thing for a few years and then loyal to something else, and then just not be loyal at all. There's also this rejection that institutional structures should be continued and perpetuated for their own sake. So we're living in a time when, you know, corporations go out of business and new ones start up, and then they form subsidiaries, and the subsidiaries take over the parent organization, and it's all very, very fluid. And things that we once took for granted are just no longer quite the same thing that they once were. Also, postmodernism reacts against the notion that people and the environment should be controlled by some higher authority. They don't believe that technology should be harnessed to solve human problems. For example, building dams. Why? Why would you build dams? Well, you build dams to benefit people so that there's a constant source of water, a really good water supply, water reserve, hydroelectric power, all of that. Oh, no, we don't dam the rivers at all. Rivers should be left to run free, and people are just going to have to learn to do with less. That's a very common environmentalist attitude, but it's a postmodern attitude as well. People should not be controlled, and yet in some ways, the very same people who are demanding that there be no central control of people, there be no, standard conventions in society, are the very ones who insist that their idea of not controlling people be the standard. And we see, especially we've seen with the recent COVID crisis, this very tight control and the creation of mass society through the news. Now, whether you agree with the COVID restrictions, what they were or not, still, there's this refusal to debate, there's this refusal to allow people to have options, whereas almost the same group 25 years ago were the ones that were championing freedom of choice in all sorts of ways, freedom of choice for sexual orientation, freedom of choice for abortion, freedom of choice for so many things, and yet no freedom of choice when it comes to some of these other issues. And so we're going through a real crisis, and that's why I think that we're beyond the contemporary era, that something new is happening. Postmodernism does not believe that you should regulate the environment, that the environment should be left to be what it is. We've seen a lot of public spaces, public forests close. We've seen logging stopped, all of that. And as a result, from one perspective, if you control logging, you now increase the risk of wildfires, which at least on the West Coast we have seen recently much more severe wildfires because the loggers are not in there clearing out the forest, picking up the slash and all of that. I have a degree in forestry, so that is one of the specialties that I learned long ago before I branched out into other things. Postmodern movements was a progression from the early 50s, the Beat generation. We called them beatniks. I wasn't really aware of much of that. I was very young in the 50s. But they were known for being anti-materialist. They wrote soul-searching music and poems and that sort of thing. But it was essentially a rebellion against the middle-class standards of the time. A lot of the soldiers came home and sailors came home from World War II. They got busy starting families. They built homes. They got jobs. It was all this neat American dream thing. And the beatniks protested against that and said life is more than just having a nice house and, living the standard American life or European life. There were beatniks in Europe as well. Then there was the counterculture movement of the 1960s and 70s, which I was a little bit a part of in the 1970s. This counterculture was mainly populated by baby boom generation people, which is me, from 1946 to 1964. I was born right in the middle of that, and so it went till 1964. And that was the group that was behind this youth counterculture. The Beatles, all the Led Zeppelin, all those youth music movements, as well as many others. Emerging alongside the American Civil Rights Movement, it continued much of the Beat generation's reaction against the conservative morals of the 50s, the political conservatism of the Cold War, in which the free world was striving against the world of communism, socialism, the real and perceived social oppression of women and minorities. A lot of it was real, some of it maybe had been perceived. And then, of course, the big one was the United States' involvement in Vietnam. I remember very well being a senior in high school in 1971, and the assistant principal calling me into his office and having draft forms ready for me to sign, asking me if I was ready to do my duty for my country. Of course, I didn't have a lot of choice. We all had to sign those draft forms. My draft number was high, plus I enrolled in college right after high school, so I never did go. But I had quite a few friends that had some experience there in Vietnam. And it was a very, very difficult and horrendous time, not only if you were in Vietnam as a soldier, but also here at home. There were protests and riots and all kinds of really emotional reactions to United States involvement in Vietnam. A lot of the hippies dropped out of mainstream society and explored alternatives like use of drugs, alternative value systems, sex, music, fashions. And these people had a profound shaping influence on what Western culture has become. The Beatles were absolutely key to that, as well as a number of other music groups and films. Really made a lot of influence there. The guy on the right would have been very, very typical of a lot of young people during the time, dressing like that. Other postmodern groups, subsequent generations like the Gen Xers born in the 70s and early 80s, they're known for their diversity and tolerance. And they have been known for celebrating a spectrum of tastes and styles. And then the millennials, born in the 1980s and 90s, they're known sometimes as the internet generation. You see a picture there of some goths. The goth thing kind of came and went, but they were known for being part of that millennial generation. And then now I believe it's Gen Z, and that has yet to be 100% determined as to what direction that group is going to be moving in. Postmodern trends tend to be deconstructionist, meaning that they take things apart, they reject traditional values, traditional forms, traditional ways of doing things, and redefining them in some new way, either by borrowing things from other civilizations or just exploring brand new things. Deconstructionism tends to be skeptical of many cherished notions that Western civilization has held dear for generations. Postmodernism tends to celebrate existentialism, which began in the 19th century with philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche was famous for coining the phrase, "God is dead." They explored the issues of ultimate reality and the meaning of human existence. But by the late 20th century, existentialists had come to the philosophic position that the universe and human society are absurd, meaning that they lack any real meaning at all, that life is meaningless, pointless. So if you're left with a pointless existence, why do you stay alive? Why do you even get up in the morning? Well, the existentialist viewpoint is that the essence of life is in vivid personal experiences. You want to experience as much as you can while you can. It's like the Romans used to say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. So it's just live for the moment. The focus of existentialist philosophy is the individual, not society. You don't do things for the good of society. Who cares about society? Just get what you can get while you can. Individuals do have complete freedom to make choices. They shouldn't be forced to make choices, but they're also completely responsible for those choices. And that's where a lot of people kind of go halfway with existentialism. They want the complete freedom to make choices, but they don't want to take responsibility for the consequences. They want to blame other people. And so we've got sort of a half existentialist viewpoint in society these days. Then there's a major goal in life to deal with inward feelings and strive for personal authenticity. So you want to be a real person. You want to deal with your feelings. You want people to talk about their feelings and listen to you as you talk about your feelings. It's a very personal, subjective situation. Important existentialist figures include Albert Camus, French author, died in 1960, wrote a book called The Stranger. I read it in philosophy class in college. One of the most depressing books I've ever read. It's not very long, but it explores a man who realizes that life has no meaning, and the last couple pages of the book, he goes out on the beach, pulls out a gun, and shoots himself in the head. And that's the end of it, because existentialists believe that if you can't find fulfillment in the vivid experiences of life, then there really isn't much point in living at all. And so the final serious question is, maybe I should commit suicide. Cheerful thought there. Another French author who wrote a play called No Exit, Jean-Paul Sartre. He had this play involve three characters which found themselves in hell, and they found that hell was not fire and torture by demons, but it was other people there. The other people in hell made your life miserable. Hell wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the other people. Irish writer Samuel Beckett wrote a play called Waiting for Godot, in which two tramps are waiting around for someone called Godot to come and give their lives meaning. When Godot comes, it will make sense. When Godot comes, our life will be fulfilled. But as the play goes on, it becomes quite clear that Godot never is going to come. And I don't think there's any coincidence that the first part of that person they're waiting for is God, And, the whole point being that, God's supposed to give our life meaning, and God's supposed to show us the point of life. From the existentialist point of view, God never shows up, so therefore, might as well just end it all. And so the two tramps eventually realize that life is meaningless and lonely, and they consider suicide, but they end up not committing suicide because at least they can stay alive for each other. So that's the point of this play. And again, that's a very existentialist way of looking at things. A lot of people would not find that very satisfying. So according to the existentialist philosophy of postmodernism, since the universe does not make sense and life ultimately has no meaning, people should simply live for the vivid now. Eat, drink, and be merry, have vivid experiences, skydive, bungee jump, go to exotic places, meet interesting people, experiment with all sorts of things because your life is short. You might as well enjoy it while you can. Make tolerance and individual freedom major values. So you've got to be tolerant of me. I've got to be tolerant of you because we're all trying to find some meaning in life. And then they consider syncretism and experimentation to be order of the day. So syncretism is finding things from all kinds of systems and philosophies and cultures and making your own kind of life based upon finding a little bit of this and a little bit of that. As I said, humanities follow the prevailing philosophical worldview. So we're going to see how the humanities in this period have followed postmodernism and existentialism. So movies made during this time. Two very classic movies. Cool Hand Luke is an exploration of existentialism in which a man stands up against authority and he can't be broken by authority, but in the end, he's not only broken by the authority, but also killed as a result. And back in the 60s and early 70s, there were a lot of movies that sent you home kind of bummed out because of that very existentialist philosophy. And then The Graduate, which you see on the right, in which the young man is trying to figure out what to do once he graduates from college, ends up having an affair with the mother of the girl he's engaged to and gets into one jam after another, and finally they just run off together and kind of drop out of society. Let's look at some contemporary art. How about Andy Warhol and his pop art, which featured consumerism, which you see the Campbell's soup cans there. You could have easily taken a picture of those Campbell's soup cans, but he painstakingly painted each one, including with the labels and the kind of soup. A lot of people would say they don't understand what the art value would be, but it's pop art. It's something that immediately captures people's attention and something that's very familiar to them. Another example is the different shades of Marilyn Monroe that he painted. This is one that's a little bit off in terms of its color, but he painted her in different shades from black and white to vivid colors. Again, she's iconic. She's somebody that is easily recognized. That's pop art. Donald Judd is known for his minimalism. Minimalism removes the human presence from art as much as possible. So here you have a group of boxes attached to the wall and some other boxes standing alone with different colors. Robert Rauschenberg is famous for his found art, or sometimes called combine art, meaning combined different things. So he combined different objects that he had found or that were stored in attics or he came across in people's yards, like the goat with the tire around it, or the other with bicycle wheels. So again, people are searching for what has meaning. Does it have any meaning? Maybe it has more meaning than the previous pieces of art in Western civilization. At least that's what the artists were trying to say, I think, or that anything can be beautiful. If I say it's beautiful, then it's beautiful. Contemporary sculpture, David Smith and his QB series, he did a number of these, either rectangular shapes, box shapes, triangle shapes, on stands in a natural surrounding, many of them. So you've got this huge contrast between these very unnatural shapes and then the natural surroundings. Alexander Calder did mobiles. Mobiles you hang from the ceiling, usually, and they're on pieces of wire, and this is called spring blossoms. And then you see at the bottom Henry Moore's recumbent figure. Recumbent just means lying down. It's sort of human-like, but just vaguely. Again, saying that if I say that's beautiful, then it's beautiful. Maya Lin was commissioned to do the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. I remember hearing that there was going to be a Vietnam War Memorial, and when I heard what the concept was, that it was this long, shiny black wall with names, I thought that was kind of a dumb idea. But then I visited the Vietnam War Memorial, and it no longer seemed dumb to me because the names go on and on and on. This is the list of the American soldiers killed in Vietnam, and the list goes on and on and on. And it's by date, so you have starting with about 1966 or so, a few names, then 67 more, 68 a ton more, 69, 70, those are the big war years. By 71, 72, it was beginning to wind down, but you see it's shaped sort of like a V, and you're only seeing one side of it there, so it's huge. And sometimes people will leave flowers, they'll leave mementos under the wall below the name of their loved one. Very, very effective, very, very moving. Contemporary architecture would include Jorn Utsen's Sydney Opera House. Iconic, it's supposed to be like the sails of ships, and it's in Sydney Harbour in Australia. Then there's the eclecticism of Georges Pompidou's Centre. Georges Pompidou had been a former president of France, and they named this center after him. It almost looks like a building that's under construction or maybe a roller coaster, but that's the finished product. That's eclectic art, meaning eclectic is all kinds of different pieces put together from different kinds of things. Then there's deconstructionist or countercultural art. This is ethnic art, celebrating African Americans, celebrating Hispanics, celebrating Native Americans, whatever it may be. But it's a celebration of non-Western elements that have come to be part of Western culture. There's feminist art, like this by Judy Chicago, The Dinner Party. And you can see, if you look at the plates, they're very feminine looking. They almost, some of them represent, seems like feminine anatomy. And there's not a male symbol there, really. So it's a celebration of feminism. There's homosexual art, which would be something like the AIDS quilt, which I believe happened back in the 90s in Washington, D.C., and the mall. You can see the entire mall was filled with quilts for the cause of AIDS. Earth art. You see, here's an example of a stone that's been planted with moss and other vegetation to look like a human face. And then there's anti-religion art, which this is very offensive to many people. In fact, it's offensive to me. Someone decided to put a crucifix in a bottle of urine and post that in a museum as art. And, with freedom of expression and all that, there wasn't much a lot of people could do about it until they found out that the artist was paid to do this with money from the National Endowment of the Arts, which is taxpayer funded. And once that was found out, he had to remove it, because you can't ask American taxpayers who revered Jesus to pay for a piece of art where Jesus is in a bottle of urine. So that was removed, and hopefully it was flushed. Not the crucifix, but what the crucifix was in. So where do we go from here in Western civilization? Well, don't know. As I mentioned at the beginning, I think we're in a different period already. What that period will prove to be, I do not know. But there are some options. Either we're going to revive a past style or value. There have been revivals in the past. Neoclassicism is a good example of trying to revive the works and the styles of the Greeks and the Romans. Maybe we'll do something like that. Maybe we'll import styles and values from other cultures. Maybe the ethnic art will take off. Maybe we'll explore new territory, whatever that may be. But that's something that you, as members of the stream of Western civilization, will help to decide. I hope you've enjoyed this class. I hope you've learned a ton. And I hope you'll enjoy Western civilization, its artworks, its pieces of music, and its achievements for years and years to come. This is Dr. Michael Bogart. Maybe we'll see you again. So if you enjoyed my perspectives on this subject of Western civilization and its many forms of art and music and literature, then you might want to check out my many other videos and courses at aspectministries.com. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll find a lot to think about there. So check it out. Thank you.